as simple as it is. Now, troop, in today's video, I want to break down the fundamentals of drum and bass lines. So we're going to look at the different types of notes that you would use, the different kind of breakdowns and rhythms, and then how we would make those into melodies, and then how we bring it all together to build out our bass lines. Key terminology and things that you're going to need to know. I'm going to give you that information as we go along and give you examples of each to really help you grasp what concepts we're looking at, why they're important, and how they fundamentally work in everything you want to build up. There are two types of way that you will generally end up playing a bass line in DnB. Because it's so fast paced, the two things that we end up doing is either having to cut a note off really quickly, so it either cuts itself off or it's cut off by another sound, or that it moves from one into the other. So the two terminologies for this are going to be mono or legato. We're going to take this sound just here for now, and we'll look a little bit at how this pattern works in just a moment. But this sound here is a Moog bass sound. If we just loop over it and play it back, there's something key about it. One note moves into the other, and this is called legato. If we open up my sampler here where I've made this, and we go into details, we can see here it's in the mode of legato, and we've got a glide of 88 milliseconds. That means when two notes overlap one another, instead of playing the next note, it slides this note into the next one. And we can see that happen right here in the end section, just here. Now, if we were to have that play back as mono rather than legato, we'd end up with a very different sound. Here we go. Yeah, so now we get the attack and cut off of that sound each time. It's important to understand what we're trying to build and what we're trying to achieve, whether we want that mono type or that legato type. So let's have a look at the different notations and things that we would use to generally build up a bass line. The very first one that we can start off with here is simple as can be. It is a singular note, in this case crossing over two bars. I just call this the oneer, that's how it always got referred to. And it goes over two bars because drum and bass is generally going to be like a 32 bar breakdown rather than 16, because it is at such a fast BPM. 2 bars feels relatively normal. You can switch it every bar if you want, but this is generally how it is. And it's as simple as that. So we've got a bass sound that ramps up and builds up over that time frame. Now we can use our legato and other notation to build upon that in a really simple and effective way, and that's where the oneer becomes quite a useful way that you can transition into different basses. So if we take our pattern here, we've used a legato bass sound again, and this time we've put 2 other notes in the key, in this case G. So it's just a single oneer G note with 2 legato notes at the end. Now this becomes really easy to build upon instead of just having the oneer note, because we can duplicate this very easily. And if we simply bring our note down, in this case 2 semitones to the next note in the key, this allows us to build a bass line. Very simply, just using the oneer. That's where our rhythms and our basically intervals that we're going to use come into play. So here are some examples of some of the most common ones you will use. The first one we're going to look at that fits unbelievably well into drum and bass is called the triplet. And this is very simple. It's 3 notes across a single bar. If we break our grid down into 1, 2, 3, and 4, like so, we can take one of these notes, which is 1/4 over the bar, and we place that first. We then leave a gap of 2/16, which is division of 16ths here, and put it halfway, and this gives us an 1/8, and then it fits one more time perfectly within that bar. And this can just loop over and over and over. This works so well because of the syncopation that's often found in drum and bass. It has that same syncopated rhythm, but generally your kick drum is going to be landing here and your snare is going to be landing here on this note, but not on this note. So you get that swing and syncopation between the two. One of my most successful tracks of all time, which was called High Volume, which I landed a placement with, which ended up getting played across a massive gym chain for their spin class and workout sessions for like a couple of years, was completely built off of this rhythm. But obviously we can't just do this same tonality all the time, all the way through. It gets boring very quickly. One of the simplest things that we can do with this is to add a call and response type sound with it. So we're using exactly the same rhythm or exactly the same note, but we're using two different tones to accent one another. And that ends up coming out like this. So all we've done is change that third note each time, and it gives us something completely different and way more exciting. Now then we can mix and match those notes up pretty much in any fashion that we so desire. Maybe decide that we want to have 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2. Completely mixing it up, giving this way more kind of bounce and ebb and flow in that. And I've changed just a couple of notes here. End of the second bar, remember we mentioned before, like 1 bar in drum and bass kind of feels too short, so 2 bars generally feels about right. So at the end of the 2 bars, we've just got 1 note up in the overall octave, so the next note up in the chain in this case. And then on the end of the 4th bar, we just go down 2 notes in the octave, just using that exact same rhythm that we built out from the start, and this gives us way more of a melody. Okay, so that's using triplets and the 3 notes per bar broken down. There are many other ways we can do it, but this is a really good fundamental starting point before you start experimenting with other areas in that. So something else we can do are called fourths. We already looked at those, where we break the bar down into 4 different hits, so 1, 2, 3, 4 on each one of these lines in here along the 16ths. But we can also mix that in with other elements. So a 4th pattern can look like this just as much as it can look like this. They're exactly the same pattern, but it's the length of the note that tells the story here. So for example, this will go like this. Whereas if we were to use this pattern, it's exactly the same thing, but with shorter notes. If we use that on something that has a longer sound overall, like this, we can end up getting 2 different patterns out of it. But we decide to adjust the length of the notes, we can make a completely different pattern if we then mix and match those with, say, the 3 short notes, so 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one's being a bit longer. At the end of, say, each 2nd bar or the end of the 4th bar, we can mix it up with maybe 2 longer notes. Opposed to It is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. So even though it's a very basic pattern, just hitting on the 1, 2, 3 and the 4, the note length becomes incredibly important. Now the length of those notes are also determined by our overall pattern division or a quantized division that we're going to use. So what we were using here, these are 1/8 divisions. Would you believe it? It's because 8 of them fit in one segment. A 16th would then be this right here. So we could actually start using 16ths into 8ths into 4ths. and we can create another rhythm element by doing that. So here's another example of moving to fourths, eighths and sixteenths. So here we're going on fourths. This is also on fourths, but we've just changed the note length. So we're using the eighths note length. We're using the eighths note length here, and we're still on fourths. We go in the middle, and there is our first hit on the eighths. And then again, we're going to fourths. We've got an eighths hit here where it's going in the middle, and then a little roll out of sixteenths at the end. And then the juxtaposition of having two voices for the call and response. You know, we could maybe take this little accent here and make that sixteenths as well. Just that little roll in. Now let's go all the way back to our more liquidy sounding legato style bass that we had here. I want you to have a quick look at this and think, from everything I've just explained, what have we got? So we've got a oneer, legato into another oneer, into another one. What's this right here though? Let's zoom in, so we're breaking it down in one bar. This is landing on fourths, and so are these at the end. And let's switch our patch back into legato. That huge difference is it swings from one note to the other rather than the hard hitting stopped. So what about this example here? Two oneers over the two bars, single note bass, whatever you want to call it. Then we've got an eighths here and we've got a fourths here. So we do a quick legato ramp up at the end of that first bar, and then a slower one, but only up that one semitone. In this case, we're jumping up two, so we're going up to the two same notes. And we could bring this out as well, so we actually get that legato swing into the lower note as well. If we want the notes to swing up and down like this and have a constant presence, we can. But as you notice, it doesn't have the same kind of rhythmic impact that you get from the other mono basses where they cut one another off. Now, even though this is a legato sound, we can do it by just not having the MIDI overlap, and it will then trigger each time. And now you'll get more of that rhythmic element to it. It's not really how this sound was designed to work, but hopefully you get the principle. What I can do is bring it down to here though. And you get the idea that you can have that rhythmic principle going on as well without having to move it from one note to the other. It depends what you're trying to create and what kind of atmosphere and energy you want to bring through. So for example here, we could keep these notes here and we could also have our call and response going on. So we'll take these out of here. I'll give them to a different bass sound, like so. So now we can go. So perhaps now with this shorter, sharper mono sound, we would look at playing around with our rhythm, and we'll keep these on the eighths and fourths. So we got that juxtaposed each bar. So it's a little bit different. So maybe we would do something like we begin on sixteenths here. And then perhaps we have a longer, and then we perhaps have this on the eighths, eighth. So we go sixteenths, eighth, eighth. And perhaps here we could even do this. And then we would probably look to mimic that rhythm again for a second run round on a different note. So remember our triplets from the start, but really it's just the note length and sitting on the eighths, but a longer note. In case this still hasn't hammered home, let's just have a look at some other variations that we might want to look at. Now here's another variation that you can use as well. And these often get called tuplets, and they give a very indirect swing to the overall music. They sit on the 16ths, but we use longer notes, and you can see how they're broken down here. Now, if you're struggling to put something like this onto the grid, a very simple thing that you could do would be to say, draw this in on your 1, 2, 3 and your 4, and we can go and do the 1/6 triplet. So we've got a 1/4 triplet 1/6. That's going to give you the same pattern. Looks slightly different here because I've shortened the notes off to make sure they don't legato into one another, and that gives us this kind of pattern. Yeah, you would have heard it before, kind of bouncy pattern. Now you can mix that in with something like your 16th, so like have the first 2 hits, for example, put like an 8th hit here, and then maybe we'll go something like this. So there's a whole bunch of other ways we can mix these up as well. So here's a somewhat extreme example of different call and response, different note types and different positioning. That really is as simple as it is. Now, one thing we haven't really discussed is note-wise. Well, as you can see, I'm only ever moving 1 or 2 notes away from anything. And even in here where it looks extreme, if actually we were to bring this down an octave, you'll notice it's in the same area as this. And even if I bring all of this stuff, and even if I bring all of these down an octave, they're actually in exactly the same range as well. It's just that those higher notes I've moved up an octave at exactly the same notation, so everything works in together, and we get that call and response of really low note, screechy high note, and it jumps back one and the other. Generally, I'm staying within a 1 single octave for all of a bass line, and for the most part, unless we're trying to have a little bit of flair at the end of a track in DnB, we move 1 or 2 semitones up and down each time. So let me give you another example. Here we've got fourths, so hitting on the 1, 2, 3, 4. Or so here we've got something even slower than the oneers. These are 1/2, so they're taking up half a bar. They're 1/2 if you were to do it as a quantized value, followed by a 2-bar oneer and then another 2 halves. So if we play this back. Now I've paired that up with an 8ths rhythm right here. And then on top of that, I've also put a 4ths and triplets combination rhythm as well. If we take the others away so you can see that. And they all work together in harmony, and they're all just moving those similar notes in that same octave range, which is why I can't show them all at once, but you can kind of see everything that's going on right there. So that right there was my deep dive into DnB basses. I really hope that's given you something good to work for. If there's anything you didn't understand or I haven't explained well enough for you, throw it in the comments down below, and I will either look to make a video that does a better job and explain it in another way, or I will hopefully be able to help you within that comment. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos.